Do you know, 1976 wasn't a bad time in Britain if you're a fan of fantasy cult genre television. We had Tom Baker's Doctor Who settling into his imperial phase in his first couple of years in the role. We had the second season of Terry Nation's Survivors. We had Space 1999, Jerry Anderson's latest sci-fi show, was still doing the rounds. His earlier shows, Thunderbirds and UFO, were popping up in slots here and there. The New Avengers arrived on television. Steed now accompanied by Purdy and Gambit for a new run of adventures. For kids, we had the Tomorrow People. They were still rattling along on their early afternoon slots on ITV. There was a lot going on. But then we had Star Maidens. How was that all about? Star Maidens. Star Maidens arrived on British television in September 1976. And it's a very, very odd television series. If you've never seen Star Maidens, I urge you to seek it out because it is quite unlike anything you have ever seen. And it's an odd one because it was made in the 70s and it falls between two stools, really. It's cheap and cheerful, and yet it has a look about it that makes it look lavish and big budget and a little bit spectacular. It's on film, it's quite slick, it's a lot of location filming, decent special effects here and there. But it's such a bizarre, peculiar, odd series with tonal shifts all over the place. 1 minute it's sort of hard sci-fi, the next minute it's sort of social commentary about the battle of the sexes, and the next it's sort of domestic knockabout slapstick comedy. Let me tell you more about Star Maidens, because it is such a bizarre thing. It was a British-German science fiction series made by Portman Productions for ITV. It was made in 1975, finally screened late in 76. It was filmed at the legendary Brave Studio and on location around that area, Windsor, Bracknell in Berkshire, and famously in Black Park in Buckinghamshire, the park area behind Pinewood Studios, where lots of Hammer horror films and Jerry Anderson shows had lots of their footage shot. It was a very odd show though, because it was a co-production between Portman in the UK and a German company, Werbung im Rundfunk, advertising and broadcasting. I've no idea how this show came about. I have no idea what the thinking was, why it was thought to be a good idea to have this co-funded programme. However, it was commissioned, it was made. It was the creation of Eric Pace, who's quite a senior British TV scriptwriter. He's quite well known in the 60s and 70s. It was based on an idea by Horst Graf von Hardenberg. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. If you're familiar with scriptwriters, and particularly Doctor Who fans, you'll notice that some of the scripts were written not just by Eric Pace, but also by John Lucarotti and Ian Stewart Black, who wrote some Doctor Who serials back in the 1960s, with other scripts by Otto Strang. Sorry for the accents. It is such a peculiar series. The concept of the series is, I suppose, potentially an interesting one. It's basically the battle of the sexes in a science fiction setting. The story is the planet Medusa is a planet in the Proxima Centauri galaxy, which is ruled by women. Men are subservient. Men do the menial works. Men are the engineers. Women are the power. Women are the intelligence. Women are the driving force on this planet. And they live this opulent life of luxury until a comet called Dionysus hurtles through space, crashes into the planet, so the Medusans have to relocate below the surface into this huge multi-level city which they built. The planet is also knocked off course, and in time it drifts into our solar system. The Medusans scan Earth and discover, to their horror, that it's ruled by men, and it's off limits. Nobody from Medusa is allowed to go to the planet. However, Earth is an attractive proposition to two particular men. Adam, played by Pierre Brice, and Shem, played by our very own Gareth Thomas, just a couple of years away from playing Blake in Blake 7. They steal Supreme Councillor Fulvia's space yacht and travel to Earth. They're pursued by Supreme Councillor Octavia in her spaceship Nemesis, this donut-shaped spaceship with glowing lights. Follows it to Earth. The space yacht crashes on Earth. Adam and Shem are presumed dead. The police arrive on the scene. The scientific community is fascinated. The Nemesis arrives, and Adam and Shem go on the run. This sets up the tone of the first few episodes of the series. The scientific community, headed up by Professor Evans, Derek Farr, who played the original voice of Aurak in Blake 7. He's fascinated, of course. We don't get much in terms of the global sort of view of what's happening here. It's very much a localised Southern England sort of thing. There's no word from America or anywhere else in the world about, oh my God, we've made first contact. It's all very localised, with police and cars tootling around trying to find these two refugees. And it's all very quirky and parochial. Adam and Shem, as I say, they go on the run and they learn about humanity and learn about the sort of role reversal, if you like, that men have the positions of power in the world. And they want to stay on Earth, but of course the Medusans want to take them back. Later on in the series, two Earth characters, Dr. Rudy Schmidt, played by Christian Quadfleeg, what a fantastic name, and Lisa Harrow's Dr. Liz Becker, they are taken hostage and taken back to Medusa. And the sort of middle part of the series is all about brokering a deal between the Medusans and the humans to capture Adam and Shem, who are running about the place having stupid adventures, and getting the two Earth scientists back home to Earth. It's such an odd series. I watched it all again recently in preparation for this video because I haven't seen it for ages. And it's sort of quirkily enjoyable. You're sort of aghast at some of it because of the naivety of it from a science fiction sense, and also the naivety in terms of the battle of the sexes element. The women's lib sort of thing was a big thing back in the 70s. It seems hard to imagine looking back now the way that the world is now in terms of equality, but it was a big deal back then. I suppose the idea of women in charge of a planet had some currency then. It had some dramatic possibilities. But it often subverts itself by the men surreptitiously becoming the people who resolve certain dilemmas and situations, and they're the ones who are the sort of turn situations around, particularly in later episodes. And you have this planet of women, the Medusa women, and despite the fact that it's women's lib and women's rights and women in charge, a lot of the women walk around not wearing very many clothes. The security guards are all in hot pants and crop tops. Even Chancellor Fulvia's got this thing which reveals half her belly and her cleavage, and it's quite sexualised in the way that it promotes the women. And I suppose you could say, well, yeah, that's just women presenting themselves as they want to be, not necessarily being objectified by men, but they are dressing the way they want to and behaving the way that they want to. But it is interesting that they were trying to present this story of a female-dominated planet, but the women didn't wear very much. In terms of the production, this is supposed to be quite a low-budget show, and yet because it's on film, it was on 16mm film, so it doesn't quite have the gloss of a 35mm series, but it still looks quite glossy. There's lots of outside stuff. The set design by Keith Wilson, who did a lot of stuff for Jerry Anderson. There's this fantastic dual-level set of Medusa, which looks pretty impressive. I mean, we don't see a lot of it. We do see similar camera angles and lots of extras bustling around, but it looks like part of an underground city that's pretty impressive. The model effects are variable. If you watch the title sequence with the scene of the comet hurtling towards the above-ground city, it's a very obvious tabletop model and it looks terrible. But some of the stuff, the spaceship scenes are really very good, and there's some nice shots of the Nemesis spaceship on Earth where it's landed and people coming down out of the hatch. Spaceship scenes, I say, are all pretty well done, really. So I think those sorts of effects are quite good. There's some decent practical effects, optical effects, and I think by those standards, it stands up quite well against what, say, Doctor Who was doing at the time, which still tended to be very videotapey and clunky. So I think it looks quite slick. In terms of the cast, we have this odd mix of British actors, good, solid British actors. I mean, the ostensible lead of the series, and she gets the first credit in many episodes, is Lisa Harrow, who plays Dr. Liz Becker, who one of the scientists who ends up on Medusa. But we also get Gareth Thomas, as I said, playing Shem, Derek Farr playing Professor Evans. We also get appearances from people like Graham Crowden, Ronald Fraser, and Ronald Hines as a police inspector. They're fairly sort of bumbling comedic men roles, which is probably why they're there, I guess, to sort of reflect the imperious, powerful, dominating Medusans and the rather dim-witted human men on Earth. And then we get this European cast, a lot of whom are quite well known in Europe, but really didn't mean very much over here. Pierre Brice plays Adam, who is Shem's partner in crime in their exploits on Earth. He and Gareth Thomas got these sort of Malin Street type things in their hair. And it's hard to tell sometimes. Dialogue is dubbed in certain places, because obviously a lot of the foreign actors were probably speaking in German and French and then dubbed over into English, which makes the soundtrack feel a bit sort of distant. It's sort of people like Gareth Thomas obviously speaking English. Then you get these heavily dubbed voices later on for other characters. In terms of the Medusans, you've got Christiane Kruger playing Supreme Council Octavia. She is the daughter of noted actor Harvey Kruger. And she's very good, actually. Her performance is very solid throughout the series. She's this sniffy officer who really, she's got no time for anything other than the servitors that they are on Medusa. And she has that very upright bearing about her, and you can believe that she would be an official in this alien community. And then we have Christian Quadflieg as Rudy Schmidt, who is Lisa Harrow's boss. And again, we have lines here which again subvert the idea of the series, where when they go to Medusa, she is the dominant character, the dominant in that relationship. But she's constantly saying, I much preferred it when I was your assistant. I was much happier as your assistant, when he is sort of downgraded as a servile man. But his performance is, again, it seems as if it's dubbed. His dialogue doesn't seem particularly naturalistic coming out of his mouth. But he is sort of, I suppose he's the male hero figure of the show. And again, one of the odd things about the show is that characters drop in and out. It starts off serialised over the first 4 or 5 episodes. And then there are some standalones. It's hard to wonder watching it if they'd scripted the whole thing when they started filming it, or knew exactly where they wanted to go with it, because it wanders all over the place. The first few episodes, as I said, are about Adam and Shem being on the run and the attempt to recapture them. Then Shem gets recaptured and he disappears for a bit. And then we get stuff with Adam. And we get this little raft of comedy episodes towards the middle of the series. There are episodes like Test for Love and The Perfect Couple, particularly The Perfect Couple, which is so bizarre because this reunites Adam and Fulvia as a couple on Earth. And despite the fact that they are aliens from another planet who will be subject to all sorts of examinations and probes and all sorts of discussions about what's going to happen to them, they decide that they want to live a domestic life. And the whole episode is set in this new build estate somewhere near London. And it's sort of amusing in that Fulvia's going off to work with Professor Evans and he's at home dusting and cooking. And it plays weakly on those stereotypes of the man at home, the woman out of work. He complains because she's late at home from work. She's complaining because he's making friends with local women. It's all the stuff of low-rent 1960s sitcoms. Think George and Mildred, Man About the House, those sorts of things, those sort of sexual stereotypes. I think it's done in a way to try and subvert it, but it just falls into it because it's so lamely written and so lamely put together, and so cheaply put together, because those middle episodes are really struggling, and you do sort of wonder if they were padding for a story that had run out of steam quite early, had another gasp of energy towards the end, but had nowhere to go in the middle, because some of those middle episodes are just staggeringly bad in every sense. And it's so cheaply done in that they're being chased by 2 police officers, and there's no sense of scope or scale to the thing at all. It's very much a insular thing that's going on in this little area around London. It's an odd old series for sure, but it's not without its charms. I mean, towards the end, there are some quite interesting episodes. It sort of finds its sci-fi groove as it reaches the last stretch. There's an episode called What Have They Done to the Rain, which is sort of about the effects of acid rain on the surface of Medusa, which threatens the future of the whole planet. Then we have, but then we lurch into a terrible episode called Hideout, which is back in council estates where Shem is on the run. He finds himself falling in with this woman who is attracted to him, and it's terribly bad. But then we have 2 decent science fiction episodes at the end. There's a thing called Creatures of the Mind, which is sort of a psychological thing about the effects of AI. And AI below the surface of Medusa is causing problems, and that's quite well done. And the final episode is interesting in that it introduces the enemy. It's called The Enemy, and the exchange is finally going to happen between the human slaves and the Medusans. And suddenly a spaceship appears in our galaxy and it's hunting down the Medusans. There's vague reference to the fact that they are the Medusans' enemies, and I think it's Octavia who says at one point, they prey on us, they feed on us, which is, for a series that's been a bit knockabout and a bit lightweight, it's sort of a slightly darker theme to introduce in the final episode. But it all ends up with smiles and smirks as the status quo is reset and the Medusans go back where they came from, the humans go back where they came from, and everybody lives happily ever after, with no consequences, no suggestion of where we go from here in terms of this intergalactic relationship. And that's Star Maidens. It's such an odd show. It has this slickness about it, and yet it's sloppily written, sloppily produced in places, and then some decent special effects sequences. It's really all over the place, and it has to be seen to be believed. It didn't have an afterlife, really. It had a screening. I remember watching it afternoons, I think, on ITV. Because I was into, and still am into this sort of stuff, I watched it fascinated. But even then, I thought, well, what is this? It has a feel of a Gerry Anderson show. And in fact, as I said, Keith Wilson, the production designer, worked on Gerry Anderson shows. And in fact, he brought a lot of Anderson stuff with him. If you watch the show, you'll see certain bits of the sets are lifted from things as far back as UFO. Lots of control panels that were rented out after UFO finished production. They appeared in Doctor Who lots of times in the 60s. And you'll see lots of flashing lighty things, which you, if you're a fan of these things, will recognise. There are certain sound effects, Moonbase Alpha sound effects, space sound effects, which are repeated throughout the series. And in fact, in one episode, I noticed sound effect of Wotan from Doctor Who in 1966 was used for a computer effect. And the models have in places have a Gerry Anderson look about them. So it has the look of a Gerry Anderson show, but not quite the class of a Gerry Anderson show, mainly due to very peculiar scripting. But as I said, there's no tale, there's no particular cultural imprint that this show has left, because most people probably forgot it quite quickly. But there was a paperback adaptation of the series released in this paperback book, which I had, and I'm sure I read. This was written by an Ian Evans, which was the pseudonym for a sci-fi author, Angus Wells. This was published by Corgi in 1977. Following year, there was a Star Maidens annual. Now, I'd never heard about this until I researched the series a couple of weeks ago. I've never seen this book. It looks terrible. However, I would love to see it. So if anybody out there watching this video has on their shelves a copy of the Star Maidens annual, could I beg a borrow of it, please? I would love to see what it looks like. I've seen photos of the inside pages, and the comic strip looks terrible. The text features look pretty terrible, but I'm interested in this sort of thing. I would be interested in seeing it if anybody has it. Leave a comment down below if you have. It would be great. It was released on DVD twice. There have been two different DVD editions, one of which has an interview with Gareth Thomas where he talks about making the series, and that's actually available on YouTube, that interview. In fact, the whole series is available on YouTube. You don't even have to track down the DVDs. In fact, someone has gone to the trouble of remastering it in HD, and you can find those episodes all on YouTube, and that's how I rewatched it. And it really looks great. It's really scrubbed up very well because it's on film. It's not necessarily upscaling. It looks HD and it looks great quality. Unfortunately, being in great quality does tend to emphasise the weaker points of the production and where it's a little bit shoddy and slipshod. But generally, it looks, it has a 70s film series slickness about it, which is unfortunately undermined by the very odd storylines in places. And I think it's an interesting series in that it was tackling those issues that were prevalent at the time. It's just unfortunate that it tackles them in such a ham-fisted, clumsy way. All the episodes are written by men. It's all directed by men. So you do wonder quite what perspective they had on the issues that they were trying to deal with. And I suspect that's why it all comes across as slow, awkward and unconvincing. It's because it was written by blokes who weren't entirely sure what they were on about. It's a real curio, it really is. And I do recommend that you take a look at it. When I finished watching it a couple of nights ago, I actually thought I'm going to miss watching this in a way. Because I've been watching an episode here and there, and 2 episodes here and there. And I got used to its sort of ramshackle, all over the place charms. And I quite liked some of the characters. I mean, it was fun to see Gareth Thomas in this pre-Blake role. And all the characters were quite fun to be with. But it is sort of a very, very unique show. One series of 13 episodes. Incidentally, there was going to be a second series. So even though it didn't get a network screening, I don't know what happened to it overseas, whether it fared better overseas. But there was talk of a second series, and I think there were some plans made for a second series. It was going to be filmed in Canada, and I think they picked up on the idea of the enemy, and it was going to be more about the enemy tracking down the Medusans and perhaps some sort of conflict between the enemy and the Medusans on Earth, which could have been quite interesting. I don't know what the casting position would have been, whether how many of the original cast would have returned, but I think that would have been quite an interesting idea. But I think because the show was quite low budget anyway, I think there were some funding issues and eventually the plans fell apart and it never happened. I think that would have been quite interesting, but I suspect it might have moved it away from the whole point of the series in the first place, which is this battle of the sexes thing. So it's very interesting show to look at. If you do decide to watch it and you've never seen it before, don't expect to be blown away by it. Expect to be left jaw dropped by it on occasionally, because it is wonderfully inept in so many ways. But it's fun. It's actually quite good fun. So if you've seen Star Maidens, if you have any memories of Star Maidens, why not let me know what your memories are, if you watched it at the time or if you've seen it since or read the book or anything. Leave a comment down below, let me know what your thoughts are. It's one of those shows that you do watch going, really? Seriously? But then there's the odd episode where you think, there's potential there. This is the thing I think I would say about the series. There's a lot of untapped potential in what it was doing. Of course, if it was remade now, it would be entirely female. You'd have female writers and directors. That's the direction that we are in now. But I think it's a positive that there was an attempt to recognise the issues that were around at the time about equality and what they used to call women's lib. And a show tried to address it. It's just unfortunate that it did it in this awkward and unconvincing way. That's Star Maidens, which is a real curio to say the least. Right, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, why not like and subscribe? Press the subscribe button, press the like button as well. Thumbs up will be cool. Leave a comment down below if you've seen Star Maidens or if you're interested in tracking it down. That'd be great to hear. And of course, I will see you soon for plenty more stuff. There should be more videos later in the week. Plenty of stuff in the back catalogue for you to go and look at if you're new here, so why not stick around for more stuff? I'll see you soon. Until I do, yeah, keep taking the stuff.